In this video, we're going to analyze and I'm going to help you understand every single chord in Chopin's C minor Etude, Opus 25, number 12. This was actually picked by my audience. I put out a poll and gave people 3 choices of which one they want to see me do, and this one by far. Now, before we start talking about this piece, I want you to know before we jump in here that 5 chords like to go to 1 chord. When I say something is a 5 chord, what I'm saying is it has this sound and wants to go to something like, so 5 chord, 5, and 5's one to go to 1. That is really important for understanding this piece, especially because there will be many times where 5 chords do not go to 1 chord. We analyze Moonlight and we've analyzed Prelude and C major together, and almost always the 5 chords went to 1 chord. Not so in this piece. Chopin's going to mess with us quite a bit. Now, step 1 is really figuring out what Chopin is doing with his texture. So every single measure of this piece pretty much goes something like this. We play 3 notes. They're not the same notes in both hands. So 3 notes. Then again, this octave. Then you go back down. Then you go to the next measure. Then you go to the next measure. Over and over and over again. So what you can kind of see is you're doing this shape here. Then you do it again here. Then here. Then back down. Then here. Then here. In fact, this is how I actually learned this piece. And I would encourage you guys to do the same thing. If you try to learn this etude, don't start out by just trying to read every note. Get the shape down. You're here, but you can kind of get the chords like this. Practice moving and finding the next chords. Then even what we're going to do is go one step further in this video for sure and just normalize it to 1 octave. Instead of playing it 3 different places, it's almost always the same notes. I'll point out when it's not, but when it's all the same notes, you have that's measure 1. Measure 1 is this. That's all the notes. It's displayed over 3 octaves. That's all the notes. Measure 2, measure 3, measure 4, measure 5, measure 6, measure 7. That's actually how I memorized this piece. I sat down, just memorized the chord progression. I'm not first. I was kind of getting the hang of the technique too at the same time. It's still really hard to play. It's still really fast. But the first thing you can do is see that the chords can be boiled down to really just the first 3 notes of each measure. They're going to do those same 3 notes over and over and over again. And with that, we're ready to analyze measure 1, one of the only normal measures in the entire piece. So we have a C way down here, a G, and a C. Now, like I said, we're going to go C, G, C, C, G, C, C, G, C, C, G, C. We're not going to do every one of those. We just need one of the C, G, Cs. Then the right hand has E flat, G, E flat. Again, it's going to do E flat, G, E flat, E flat, G, E flat over and over and over again. The first principle for analyzing chords is always cut out all the duplicates. If we're talking about what chord is this is a C major chord, C, E, G. It's in an F minor chord, F, A flat, C. We don't need to know that there are 4 E flats or 6 E flats. We just need to know, is there an E flat present and is it part of the chord? So we're going to cut out the 2 E flats and just leave us with 1 E flat. We can cut out the 2 left-hand Cs and just leave us with 1 left-hand C. Then actually the right hand has a G and the left hand has a G. We only need one of those 2 Gs. We can cut out one of the Gs. So we end up with just a C, a G, and an E flat in the right hand. The next step is to squish this into 1 octave, C, E flat, G. And that is a C minor chord. We know it's in a normal order because it's C, E, G. If we would have ended up with E flat, G, C, we would go E, skip the letter F, G, skip the letter A and B, C. Chords have to be every other letter name for the most part. Now, that was more of a rule in the first 2 of these videos. This harmony is a little more complicated, so it's not always going to work out that way. But we should try to put things in every other letter name. In this case, E flat, G, C is not every other layer name because there's too big of a jump between G and C. C, E flat, G is every other layer name. So this is some kind of a C chord and it's a C minor chord. If this is your first one of these videos of mine that you've watched, just know that I tend to start out pretty slow for the first few chords to kind of get into the system and then speed up as things go along. That will actually definitely be true of this piece because some of the weirdest chords are right from the beginning. Okay, measure 2. We get this wonderful chord here as our second chord of the entire piece. We have a C, we have an F, we have a C. So we only need one of the Fs and one of the Cs. We can cut out the duplicates. And then the right hand has a D, A flat, D. So cut out one of the Ds. We're left with F, C, D, A flat. And we can take all that and put it into 1 octave. So the A flat's coming off the top. We're putting it in the bottom here. So we have F, A flat, C, D. Then you have to ask yourself, is that every other letter name? F, A, yes, F, G, A, B, C, D. Doesn't work, right? Because F, A, C had to go to E next. So this is not every other letter name. So we're going to try to flip this until we find every other letter name. And we get that right here. D, F, A flat, C. D, F, A flat, C, every other letter. D, F, A, C. We go D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And then what kind of a chord is this? Well, we have a D, F, A flat, which is a diminished triad. But then on top, we have a C natural. Now, this is a half diminished 7. We actually had this chord, I think, I'm sure in both the other pieces we've analyzed, but they didn't show up till later on in the piece. The reason is half diminished 7s are a little more rare unless you're in a minor key, and this is in a minor key. So in a minor key, half diminished 7th chords are just the 2 chord. So the reason it's called a half diminished 7th is because the first 3 notes make a diminished triad, DFA. Flat, DFA flat, just diminished triad, 3-note diminished chord. Then you have to ask yourself, what's the 7? Well, we could have a minor 7 on top or a flat 7 on top. If it was a flat 7, which we'll see later, that would be a fully diminished 7th chord. This is the minor 7. So we call it a half diminished 7 because it's like a diminished chord, but with a minor 7th. It's not completely diminished. So 2 half diminished 7ths, 2 chords, especially 2 half diminished 7th chords, really want to go to 5 chords. If you're like a veteran now and you've watched my other 2 videos, you know 2-5-1 is like the progression of music throughout hundreds of years. Once you get to a 2 chord, you know a 5 chord's right around the corner, and that 5 chord is going to go to a 1 chord. And that is why in measure 3 we get this chord. Definitely not a 5 chord. Like I said, this piece is going to mess with lots of those rules and not always do what we expect it to do. So we have a 1 chord in measure 1, just C minor. We're in the key of C minor, so C is 1. Measure 2 is a D half diminished 7. That is a 2 chord. Then measure 3, we're really expecting a G7 chord, a 5-7 chord. Actually, you can hear that with this sound right here. But instead we get, and this is interesting because this is just an F minor chord. We have C, A flat, C, so we cut out one of the C's, just C, A flat. Then the right hand has F, C, F. We cut out one of the F's, we're left with 2 C's. We only need one of them, so we just simply have an F, an A flat, and a C. Just an F minor chord, which is just a 4 chord. It's actually not weird at all. It's just a 4 chord. The thing that's weird about it is we're kind of stepping backwards in the progression. 2 7 chords, especially 2 half diminished 7th chords, which we had in measure 2, really want to go to 5 chords. Now 4 chords want to go to 5 chords as well. Don't get me wrong, 4 chords, they can go 5 chords for sure. 4 can go to 5, and it does a lot. But 2 is a stronger push to 5, so we're way more likely to go 4, 2, 5 than 2, 4, 5. Let me just see if we can hear that really quick. So it's more likely to do this, make it stronger, and then go to 5. Rather than this, play the strongest one first, and then lessen the impact, and then go to 5. It's just a little backwards, but you know what? It doesn't even really matter because Chopin doesn't go to a 5 chord. Measure 4, he goes back to the 1 chord from measure 1. So this is why I said this piece starts out super weird. It actually will get more normal as it goes along, but this first progression is so bizarre from just a analysis point of view. The chords aren't too bad. C minor, D half diminished 7, F minor, C minor. But from an analysis point of view, you're like 1, 2, 7. Okay, we're going to go 5. Oh, 4 instead. We're going to go 4 first before we go to 5. No, we're just going to go to 1. And then we get our 2 chord again. Same exact 2 chord from measure 2 of the piece. This is 2, a D half diminished 7 or a 2-7 chord in the minor key. And then we go to this crazy chord in measure 6. And this is going to be our first real headache chord of the piece. First, we're going to try to make it fit into our system that we expect, every other letter name. I'm going to warn you right now, it's not going to work. However, if you were analyzing this on your own, you should always in tonal music from like the 1600s to like the middle, late, really 1800s, assume it's normal first. That's what I do when I play this piece. I assumed this chord was normal, and I dug and dug and dug, and eventually I was like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work in our normal system. You can't fit it into that system, but let's try to do that first. So we have a E flat, A flat, E flat. So we just need one of those two E flats, so E flat and A flat. The left hand has a B natural and an F and a C. When we put all that into one octave, we get this chord. F, A flat, B, C, E flat. Okay. First of all, something really weird is going on because the B and the C next to each other, with the E flat and the F next to each other, you invert it this way. So it's really hard to make it work. So what's going on here is there is an extra note that doesn't belong, or there is implied notes that are missing. One of those two things is going on. First of all, if we just listen to the sound of that. It's really hard for your ear to help you because it can kind of fall into two camps. I'm going to give you two theories of what this chord could be, then I will tell you what I think it is, okay? Theory number one. This chord could be a F minor 7th chord. We have an F, we have an A flat, we have a C, we have E flat. Then that would mean the B here is just a little chromatic note to add some flavor to the chords, a little creepy note there in the middle. So it could be an F minor chord, F minor 7th, in which case this F minor 7th is going to resolve to C minor in the next measure. So that would kind of make our first progression of this piece end with what we call a plagal cadence. The first kind of line is going to end with a 4-to-1 instead of a 5-to-1. Typically in classical music, lines end 5-1. We're looking for a 5-1. But this one ends maybe 4-1 if you analyze this as a 4-7 chord. So we would get from the very beginning 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1. I can hear that if I want to convince myself to hear that. Now, before I tell you theory number two, I will tell you that it's definitely weirder and takes more of a stretch of the imagination. However, if your ear is very deeply rooted in like 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, kind of like classical harmony, this is what you want to hear. And you can convince yourself to hear this too. Again, if you're really searching for this kind of like 5 chord going to a 1 chord or some kind of a 5 chord. So theory number two is that this chord at measure 6 is some kind of a B fully diminished 7th chord. So B fully diminished 7th chord, just like the 5 chord wants to go to 1 chord. This is very similar to a 5 chord. Here's 5-1. Here's fully diminished 7. Very similar kind of sound, right? They're very similar kind of chords. So if we want to hear that, here's what we can do. We can say this chord is that chord. It's just this E flat never has a chance to resolve down. If we say this E flat is kind of like a wrong note in measure 6, it needs to resolve down to a D. If we tell our ear that when you hear that D, E flat, it's this. Let's say that was what was written. That's not too crazy, right? If that's what was written, I would just tell you, yeah, that E flat is definitely the wrong note, and then it needs to resolve to there. And then we'd be like, yeah, it's definitely a B fully diminished 7th chord, no questions asked. And so for measure 4, we could have now again, it's a little more weird because there's also the C to deal with in the bottom, and C doesn't belong in a B fully diminished 7th chord either, but the C is a little easier to explain as a pedal tone. We're going to get pedal tones in this piece. We actually already have. What a pedal tone is when the bass note is stuck on a single note despite what the chords on top are doing. So for example, the piece started with C on the bottom. It went to this 2 chord. C was still on the bottom. Even though it's part of the chord, that chord shouldn't have C on the bottom. It went to this chord, and C stayed on the bottom, C stayed on the bottom, 2 was C on the bottom. Then, so this chord's not too shocking to say, well, whatever it is, C's just been stuck on the bottom the entire time. So that's less of a stretch to explain the C. It's mostly that E flat. So kind of the 2 good analysis for this is either a 4-7 chord that just resolves to 1, kind of like a little bit of if you're used to calling it a plagal cadence or an amen cadence, a 4-1 instead of 5-1, or you could think of it as just a fully diminished 7th chord, kind of like a 5 chord going to a 1, but just that is like almost this, I don't want to call it a suspension because it's not exactly a suspension, but almost like a suspension that never gets a chance to fall. Okay, and then measure 7, we just get a C minor. We get a little tiny walk down here. I would not be concerned about these chords. I mean, yes, you can call them like C minor, and then you call it 7. You call it like add A flat or put a 6. It's not important. That's just a melodic. The melody is walking down. C minor chord, a G chord at the beginning of the next measure, and then G diminished, and then F. And then here, let's actually look at this chord for a second. This very last chord of this measure is B. Is there a D? There's not a D. B, F, A flat. But this, in my mind, is a pretty clear B fully diminished 7th chord. B fully diminished 7th chord. B fully diminished 7th chord is going to resolve up by half step. So B should want to go to C. And that's where it goes. So I think this is just a B fully diminished 7th chord missing the D. It's missing the chromatic note. However, more importantly in this measure, sometimes you don't want to get so stuck in figuring out what chords are that you don't kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture here is we have those middle voices falling down chromatically. So these middle parts are going. And if you miss that and you're just like, oh, it's a G going to a G diminished, going to an F, going to a B fully diminished 7, you're kind of missing the point of that measure here. Even just like from a pianist point of view, when you're trying to learn this piece, learning the harmony up until this point, I would say is super helpful. Learning the Roman numerals, the 1 to 2 to 4 to 1, or the just the straight of what the chords are, go C minor to D half diminished 7 to an F minor to a C minor. Learning that is really helpful. But here, I'm not that worried about chords. I know I kind of get to a G chord. Again, C is on the bottom because C is on the bottom of all these chords. Then I just walk down chromatically, then F. Then I walk down chromatically. Yeah, it does make kind of a fully diminished 7th chord, but mostly the point of here is just chromaticism. All right, great news, guys. Things are about to get way less weird. It really does get less weird as it goes along. This is a C minor chord just at the beginning. Next measure, measure 10, is just a 2 half diminished 7th chord, just like the beginning. 4 chord, just like the beginning. We're going to get some freebie measures in here too because they're perfect repeats. Next measure, though, is very interesting. C major. Now, sometimes when you're in a minor key, you're in C minor and you go to C major, it's like C major 7th. We're actually going to see that later in the piece. It's going to go to like, or C 7 chord. So C major chord with the minor 7. So it's going to go to a new key. This is just a 1 chord. It's just a major 1 chord. So we went from here. Chopin changes keys by going. There we go. We're in a new key now. We're in the key of C major. You don't have any choice about it. So C major chord, just a 1 chord. And then we get this chord. Let's chat about this chord here. This chord is weird, but it follows all the theory rules that we expect. It's not weird like the ones at the beginning of this piece are weird because they break rules. This is just kind of a more rare chord, but we've definitely seen it before. So F, D flat, F. So we have F and D flat. The right hand has A flat, D flat, A flat. So we only need one of the A flats. We end up with D flat, F, A flat, D flat, or D flat, F, A flat, which is just a D flat major chord. Which you can tell when you're playing this piece, it's a shockingly happy chord. But then it goes to... Now, as always, the goal is to understand why the chords, not just what the chords. So we get this chord here, D flat major. We'll talk about in just a second. Next chord. Here is our first true and pure G7 chord. We've kind of been waiting for a good G7 chord. G7, G major, G, B, D with an F. We call that G7 or a 5-7 chord. It's a major chord with a minor 7. And these are important chords. They're way more common in our last 2 analysis we did. But in this piece, we're going to see it too. Whenever you see this chord, you got to go to a 1 chord. Or... So we've been waiting for this chord. Literally the whole first page has been like avoiding traditional 5-7 chords until we're at the end of the first page before we get a straight up. This is just a 5-7 chord. Has to go to C major or C minor. And it does. But before we go on, we have to back up to that D flat chord and ask ourselves, what was D flat major doing there? Well, what is D flat in the key of C or C minor? So C, D, it's our 2 chord, but it's a flat 2 chord. Flat 2 chords are major chords. They are what I always call like common rare chords. There's like all of our common chords, like major, minor, the 7th chords are all like 95% of music, or maybe even more than that. They're just common chords, right? This is like falls into just a few chords that are like rare. You don't see them as much. People don't tend to be as good at finding or understanding these chords, but most pieces have them. So you should have a good understanding of these chords, even though they're a little more rare. So this here is called a Neapolitan. What it is a flat 2 chord. Now 2 chords, when you go to 5 chords, like earlier we did this. So this. Well, flat 2 chords, instead of doing this, are just this. You change just literally one note in a minor key from D to D flat. And now you have an even more intense move to 5. Composers often move in this direction. They go from less intense to adding more intensity. So instead of doing this, we get and it's just a gorgeous chord. This is called a Neapolitan chord, flat 2. It has to go to a 5 chord. I say has to, that's what it should do. And then it should go to a 1 chord. It's exactly what happened here. You have C major, Neapolitan, 5, 1. And I would say, as someone who's played this piece before, this really is where things pull into focus. Like your audience is sitting here listening to you playing a rather strange chord progression, especially okay, and then and Chopin even celebrates a little bit. Not only celebrates going to a major key, but also things being normal for once. Just like a 2, 5, 1. It is a Neapolitan 2, but still a Neapolitan 5 to 1 is a normal progression. It's been around for a couple hundred years. It even celebrates it by getting up higher on the piano, hanging out on the C major chord for a while, which C major is our 1 chord. It's our original 1 chord, but instead of being our minor 1, now we're on our major 1. So like I said, measure 15 is just a 1 chord. You add a little extra time, it takes a measure and a half to do it, but then you get a couple pretty straight up 5 chords. Now again, there's going to be that pedal C on the bottom. Don't that confuse you. It's just still just a 5 chord. So it's a 5 chord because we have, let's check out these notes here. We have a G and a D and an F and then a B and then an F and a G. Down here, you put all that together. It's just a G major chord, GBD, with F on top. F is our minor 7, so a 5/7 chord is always a major chord with a minor 7. It's not a major chord with a major 7. It's not a minor chord with a minor 7. It's not a diminished chord or a full diminished chord. It's a major chord, minor 7. And this is just straight up G7 chord again with the C on the bottom. So we get this thing to the top here, and then G7, back to C, another C major chord, C, E, G, you go to the top, you go back down, then we get another G chord just like before. This chord here, actually at the end of measure 18, I wouldn't even analyze like a chord. This is one of these times where, again, don't get too stuck in what's going on to be like, oh, what's this chord? It's very creative. You could kind of call it like a weird F chord, I guess, with G's stuck in the middle, maybe kind of feels like that, but just understand this as steps. You can definitely hear that, right? It's literally just, so you're on your C chord, you go to your G chord again, we did earlier, but instead of staying on G, we go, and then we get stuck on G for like a measure. So that last chord of measure 18, I'm not worried about saying like, oh, it's actually kind of like an F chord with G's added in, or an F2 chord, or some kind of a weird C chord or A minor 7th. No, that's worth it. It's just literally the melody is just going. You happen to get onto that chord for a second. And then measure 19 is just our G7 chord. Look, we have G, D's in the right hand, and then G and B's in the left hand. Actually, I just said G7. I don't know if there are any F's in this measure. Yeah, so it's just our 5 chord, but it's not a 5/7 chord. It's just a G chord. And again, like I've been saying 1,000 times, C is just the pedal tone stuck at the bottom. So they get the really cool, if you're used to hearing this piece, that's where the cool sound comes from. It could just be a straight up 5/7 chord like this, but we get, and that sound comes from you're playing a G chord, but C is stuck on the bottom here. And so we do that for all of measure 19, the beginning of measure 20, and then we get just an F chord. This is completely F chord, FAC. So like I said, this harmony actually gets easier. It goes from being the first page of super weird to just a little bit here. It becomes like as easy to understand as Bach's Prelude in C major, just an F chord. And then we do another F chord that's inverted. And then we end on, this becomes a really important chord later, F minor, okay? F minor. I'm about to reveal something that we talked about earlier, but for right now, measure 21, just F, A flat, C, pretty obvious F minor chord. Now where does this go next? This needs to resolve. We go 4, we're expecting G, then maybe 1, or 4 to a G, a 5/7, to a minor 1. Instead we get 4, a very strong plagal cadence. Remember guys, I mentioned plagal cadences earlier as when a 4 chord goes to a 1 chord. You don't go 5/1, which is way more traditional, way more common, but 4 just goes right to 1. So this is why I didn't entirely answer the question way back on measure 6. Was this chord really a weird 4/7 chord that went directly to 1? Or is it really a B fully diminished 7 going to 1? The traditional side of my brain wants to say it's a B fully diminished 7th chord and the E flat's weird. But then what happens later is another, this is a clear, measure 21 is 100% a plagal cadence, just a minor 4 chord going to a major 1 chord. Now normal plagal cadences aren't necessarily minor 4 chords, they would go, but this is kind of like the show tunes musical kind of ending. And so that kind of makes me think, well, maybe measure 6 was a plagal cadence as well. Maybe it really measure 6 should have been a 4/7. It's kind of the same idea. Now, one last thing about this section here before we move on to the next part, and that it kind of makes sense that the harmony becomes simplified. It's easy sometimes to think like, oh, when things are at their best, it's probably the most sophisticated. It happens. There are times where that happens, but often the parts where the piece just opens up. Sometimes can be the parts where the harmony is just really simple and it's just easy to listen to. It's dramatic because it's loud and it moves up an extra octave on the piano and everything. The chords here, like I said, are held out an extra like half measure each, but the harmony is simpler. So if you're listening to this piece, you're just like, it's kind of dark, creepy and weird. You're just like, okay, it's a little haunting. Okay, weird. Okay, we're getting somewhere. And then like just so much easier to listen to. I'm not saying the first part is bad, but it's just more like we've arrived on easy chords. So it actually makes some degree of sense that things become more simple and straightforward when it gets to this epic moment. Okay, now right around the corner, measure 23, we just immediately switch keys. And it's easy here to kind of panic and think like, oh, things got really complicated all of a sudden. But actually it didn't. This is just a direct modulation. We just direct key change. Sometimes we have modulations where there's like a pivot chord where a chord makes sense in one key, then it shifts us to a new key. There's other ways to do key change. This is just a direct, we're in the key of C, then we just play an A flat chord. We're in this key now, and then we go like something like that. I have a page turn right here, but we're just in the key of A flat now. Pretty straightforward stuff. This is just A flat, C, E flat, A flat, C. So just an A flat chord. I would just call this a 1 in the key of A flat. We're not going to analyze this as a flat 6. Yes, it is a flat 6 chord. In our original key, A flat is flat 6. But we're not going to call it a flat 6. We're just in the key of A flat now. And that's further confirmed here in just a second, where it's actually right there at the bottom of my page. This is just our 5 chord. Now it's a E flat, B flat, and then there's an E flat and a G. There's also some D flats in there. So it's tempting to be like, oh, this is pretty complicated. Once you put all this into one octave, we have an E flat major chord with a D flat. Well, E flat major, then what kind of 7 is that? It's just our normal minor 7th. This is just an E flat 7 chord. And this is why it's important to change keys. Because if you try to analyze an E flat 7 and the original key is C minor, you're going to get a really weird like flat 3 chord, but it's 7. No, but in the key of A flat is 1. E flat is our 5 chords, which is the same thing we just now did. It's actually literally the same chord progression. We're in the key of C, and we did, this is the 1 chord, and then 5, 1. Well, now we're in the key of A flat. The exact same thing, just transposed. We have a 1 chord, and then 5, back to a 1 chord. And then actually the same thing happens here. Have a 5 chord. You could try to call this a very kind of creative D flat chord. However, same thing, I would just call this a little melody moving by steps. So it's kind of like 5, still 5. I wouldn't analyze that central 4 chord probably, but all that's 5. Next measure is all 5, not 5/7, but all the 5 chords, just like earlier is all 5 chord. And then that, wait, did it go to minor 4 before? I don't remember now. Yeah, actually it's the exact same thing as earlier. This is D flat major, which is the 4 chord, still D flat major, and then we go directly to D flat minor. So you have D flat, F flat, A flat. So this is just a D flat minor chord, which is in the key of A flat. D flat is our 4 chord, so minor 4 chord. And it resolves directly to a 1 chord. So it's another one of those minor 4 going to 1 chords. Plagal cadences. Sorry. But yeah, this is actually just, even though it seems complicated because it changed keys, it's just a direct modulation. We had a 1 chord, and then we had 5, 1, 5, 4, minor 4, 1. And then we just, let's do that again. The key of A flat. 1, 5, 1, 5, 4, minor 4, going to 1. So Chopin could have done this. He did in the key of flat 6 because that's a super romantic key to go to. But he could have done this in any key. You could do the same thing again in E major if you want to, and do E major, 1 chord, and then 5, 1, 5, 4, minor 4, 1. So you could literally do the same progression any key. It's just Chopin chose to do it in the key of C major, key of 1, major 1, and he went to the key of flat 6, and the key of A flat major. Okay, now we're about to go back into kind of weird world, and not every one of these chords we're going to necessarily assign a Roman numeral 2. Some of them just kind of progress one to the next. I'll kind of tell you what they are, what the Roman numerals would be in a certain context. That's how you should be thinking about them, which chords have drive to them and which chords have direction. So even if we don't always aren't as concerned about every single detail, we still want to be aware of like, oh, this is a fully diminished 7th chord. They want to go up by a half step. Right here at measure 30, we have our A flat chord. That's how the section ended. We did our 1, we did our 5, we did our 4, we did our minor 4. We went back to our 1 chord. Then we actually go directly to this really weird chord here, which is, this is actually one of the times the harmony speeds up. This happens a couple times in this piece. Typically, the norm has been 1 chord a measure, where sometimes the chords get stretched out to like 1.5 measures. Here we actually get, let's see, what inversion are we in? Immediately, we go that right away. Now this chord's interesting. We have a C and an F sharp, a D and an A flat. If we squish all that into 1 octave, we have C, D, F sharp, A flat. There's a few different things from a classical perspective that chord could be. Now, interestingly enough, if you want to look at this chord from like a jazz chord progression, you could call it a D7 chord, but the A is flat. So like 5/7, flat 5, flat the 5th, and lower by half step. So it's kind of like a D7 chord with an A flat in there, and it should go to a G chord. And guess what? It does. The next measure is an obvious chord. So we are going to the key of G. So that is a decent analysis, a 5 chord with just a chromatic thrown in. So we get, instead of this, we get so that actually kind of works. The other chord it could be is an augmented 6 chord. So we have these augmented 6 chords, which right along with the Neapolitan, they're pretty rare chords, and we haven't dealt with them much together. But the basics of them is you're going to have a sixth. A sixth is like, C to A or D to B, the interval of a 6. But you're going to play an augmented 6. Let's talk about what that is right now. If you have A to F, that's a 6, right? I actually call that a minor 6. It's on the smaller side of 6. Any smaller, we have a 5th. So we have a 6. We make that A flat. Now we have a major 6. If we make it F sharp and not G flat, if we make it F sharp, it's still a 6 because A to F on the page still looks like a 6. It still visually looks like a 6 because it's the interval of a 6. A is that many letter names to get up to F. But on the piano, it's looking kind of like a 7th because that's the distance of a 7. So we call it an augmented 6. The composer didn't spell, Chopin knows what he's doing. He didn't spell a minor 7th. He spelled it as a 6 on purpose. And the way these chords resolve is by pushing out to the octave. Instead of 7ths resolving down like this, that's how 7ths resolve. Augmented 6 resolve like this. Push out to octave. So they're pretty weird chords, but if you understand the essence of them, if you're trying to get to an octave, and you're just scooching in by half step on both sides, they're not actually terribly weird. Now there's a few different types of these augmented 6 chords, and this is actually the ugliest one. This is called a French augmented 6 chord. And if those of you who know me, sometimes I make fun of French music. This has nothing to do with that. It's actually the name of this. The harshest one of these chords is called the French. It's actually pretty cool. It's a stack of tritones. There's an ugly tritone. There's a tritone, and you put them together, and both tritones kind of resolve to just a major chord, just a G chord. So it's kind of weird. This chord actually makes sense in both analysis. You can think of it as a D flat 5 going to 1, or if you want to, this can be that augmented 6 chord when you go to a G chord. Either way, think about this for a second. We're going to a G chord, right? Back up one chord before we just now were. This whole section we just now did. This is one of these big pictures I kind of like to talk about in these videos. It actually just makes me most excited about harmonic analysis. The small scale stuff is cool and important to understand, but sometimes you zoom out a little bit and you're like, oh, we've been hanging out on an A flat chord for a long time. We've been in the key of A flat. We've just been on an A flat chord. And then we suddenly do this chord, and we're on a G chord. Well, it's almost like we went A flat to a 5 chord, if you want to do the D analysis of this chord, to a G chord. What is A flat in the key of G? Here in the key of G, A flat would be a flat 2 chord. So remember earlier we talked about the Neapolitan chord, the D flat major being a flat 2 in the key of C? That chord there, D flat, is the Neapolitan of C. A flat would be the Neapolitan of G. And so you can either say A flat, Neapolitan of G. That whole section now has kind of become like a massive Neapolitan chord going to the key of G. But the point is, whatever you call is you understand what's going on here. We end up with an A flat chord, which transforms like a Neapolitan, then drives to G major. So we land on a pretty good, strong G major at the beginning of what I kind of think of as the development section of this etude. It's not really a development section because it's not a sonata, but it feels like this is where you go off the beaten path the most and get into kind of weird, wandering harmony land. Okay, then after our G chord, the very next measure here, we have an A flat C, A flat, G at the bottom, E flat, G. So a couple things this chord could be. It could definitely just be an A flat major chord. And that G is now stuck as the bottom note. So earlier we had C stuck as the bottom note for like the first page. Then we got the A flat stuck on the bottom for a while. And now G seems stuck on the bottom. So we're going to go G to A flat. And then measure 33, we're going to go back to this chord here, an old friend. So this is a D, an A flat, a C, and an F. You put all that in one octave, we're back to our D half diminished 7 that we had earlier. I said normally a D half diminished 7, the half diminished 7th chords are often going to be like 2 chords, not always, but often 2 chords. We have to ask ourselves for a second, D half diminished 7th would be the 2 chord in which key? It would be the 2 chord in the key of C minor. So if we end up going to C minor, we can start to see this chord as the beginnings of that push. Now, maybe we're going to go somewhere different. I don't know. I mean, I do. But let's say we don't know. This could be the beginnings of that new key. So we have a G chord, an A flat, and then this 2 maybe chord. Notice G is still stuck on the bottom though. Then we go to this chord right here. This is actually just a simple G7 chord right here. We have a G, a D, a G, a B. I live in a place where they start setting off fireworks really early, so I keep jumping and looking around because I feel like I'm being bombed or something. So if you hear explosions in the background, at least so far, it's just been fireworks. So, okay, so we got measure 34, just a big giant G chord here. Actually, interestingly enough, one of the only times this whole piece, Chopin just repeats the exact same chord for another measure. So 2 measures of this G7 chord. Now, this is a G7 chord. G7 chords really should be the 5 chord in the key of C. Now, we just said that the D half diminished 7 was probably the 2 chord in the key of C. So we're really feeling like we're pushing towards the key of C now, right? We had measure 33 and 34, a 2-7 chord going to a 5-7 chord. Then right here, we got to go to a 1 chord. It just, you set it up with a 2, you have a 5, we got to go to a 1 chord. So of course, Chopin doesn't do that. We go to an F minor chord. So then we have to ask ourselves, why is there a 4 chord here? Like things just now started to get back to kind of normal, right? We had this chord, we have our 5 chord, we do our 5 chord again. We could have just gone back to the beginning, but that would be a really short development. It's not really a development section, but a short development section for this piece, right? Chopin, what he's going to do is build up your expectations of 5 going to 1 and then crash it. Just like it here. We expect, but instead we get okay, and then he immediately goes to this chord. This is E flat, F sharp, A, kind of like an implied C in there. So F sharp, A, C, E. So that chord here, F sharp, A, C. We haven't had a lot of these in this piece yet, even though these are really common pieces. This is our fully diminished 7th chord. It's all minor thirds, stack of thirds, all minor thirds. And what's really cool about fully diminished 7th chords, I'm not going to spend as much time in this piece on them because they're not as common as it's something like the Beethovens we looked at. But what's cool about them is, first of all, if I play one, you don't know which one I'm playing. They're symmetrical every 3 half steps, half step, 3 half step, 3 half steps. So you can't know if I do this. Am I playing a C, D sharp, F sharp, or an A? You can't know which one I'm playing just by the look of it, or necessarily the sound of it. But often these chords resolve up by half steps. So if I'm playing an A, it's going to go to here. If it's an F sharp though, if that's the main note, or, so they can take you to kind of 4 destinations depending on how the composer spelled them, and they almost always spell them correctly using the right theory. So in this case, we define which one of these flipped versions of it makes a stack of thirds, and it's the F sharp, A, C, E makes sense. C, E, F, A, C, F, A, that's not a stack of thirds. That's not every other layer name. C, E, F doesn't work, right? C, skip D, E, skip F, G, right? So it can't be that. So we have to do F sharp, A, C, E flat. F, A, C, E makes sense for a stack of thirds. So this is an F sharp fully diminished 7th chord. So it should slide up by half step to G. And it does. The thing is though, it's G minor. So we're getting further away from our destination. We're trying to get back to C minor. I mean, the goal of almost any classical piece is to get back to the original key eventually. We want to get back to our original chord progression. So we're looking for that G chord, that 5 chord to take us back to our 1 chord. However, we just missed it once. We did this, then went to a 4. Now Chopin's building it up again But now we're to G minor. It really should be a 5 chord, should be a G major chord. But then Chopin, the very next measure, slides this B flat up to B natural, which could be our 5 chord in the key of C. But then you see in the middle, he throws in an A flat. So it kind of just a little bit messes up this chord. He actually turns into a B fully diminished 7th chord. B, D, F, A flat. And B fully diminished 7th chord really wants to resolve up by half step to C. It should go to a C major or C minor chord. But once again, Chopin doesn't want it to end so easily. He keeps messing with you. He's building up, building. He's trying to go to C. Then he goes, no, you know, it's still a little too early. So this one here should go. Instead goes another 4 chord. This is F, A flat, C, E flat. This is a 4 minor 4 7 chord. So F minor 7. Okay, after the F minor 7, we get to one of the best chords in all music. I love this chord. We haven't had a real one of this chord yet in this piece. So this is E flat, A flat, E flat. We'll call the duplets. Just leave ourselves with A flat and E flat. And the right hand has G, C, G. We'll call the duplicate just 1 G and 1 C. We put all that into one octave and find a stack of thirds. We get A flat, C, E flat, G, which is some kind of an A flat 7 chord. It's A flat major. However, it's not the minor 7. Like we keep seeing, the minor 7 would just be A flat 7. And we want to go here. No, this is an A flat major 7th chord. Major 7th chords, I think, are the best sounding chords in music. Great sound. So it goes from this 4-7 chord directly to an A flat major 7. Which if you want to put a Roman numeral on there, that's like a 6 chord, a 6 flat 6 7 chord. It's like in the key of C minor, it's 6 because 6 is A flat. And then there's a 7 chord on there. And then Chopin immediately goes, no, we need to get back to the beginning. So he goes back to this chord, which we've seen so many times in this piece. This is our D, F, A flat, C. This is our D half diminished 7, which for like the millionth time, that is our 2 chord in the key of C minor. So it's like, okay, here's our 2 chord. We are ready to go back to the key of C minor. We need a really strong 5 chord. And then Chopin gives us this, right? This like fortissimo, super strong. Now this is a G7 chord. I'll just spoil it for you right away before we try to figure it out. It's a G7 chord. It has an A flat on top. So if you want to call this actually a G7 with a flat 9 on top, a minor 9 chord, you can do that. G major, 7, flat 9. You can call it that if you want to. You can also think of the A flat as just a chromatic note that's about to fall, because it will fall. It's going to do this. And this is our like second best 5 chord we've had in the entire piece. We're finally ready to go back to the beginning. So we're trying to get to a 5 chord 3 times in a row. Well, 2 times in a row, Chopin has messed us up. So let's skip back a little bit here. We come from this A flat key here. We get to the key of G. Here's our 5 chord. We could go to 1, and he's like, nah, let's hang out on this key for a little bit longer. Okay, here's our 2 chord. Here's our 5 chord. Here's our 5 chord again. And here's our 1 chord. Nope, just keying 4 chord. Okay, we're going to G minor. Okay, here's our 5 chord. No, just kidding. Once again, here's another 4 chord. Here's a 6 major 7 chord. And then there's our 2 chord. Here's our 5 chord with a chromatic note. Here's our straight up 5 chord. But for whatever reason, Chopin's literally 2 measures from going back to the beginning where he's going to play a C minor chord. My theory is he doesn't want this to be the biggest moment. Like this could be the biggest moment of the entire piece. He could crash back into C minor and everything is built. Like again, in my mind, this is kind of like a development section where you're just trying to get to that 5 chord, trying to get that G chord. When you finally get there, you're going to return to the beginning. He's messed with you. He's built up 4 measure groups of building, go back to 4, building, go back to 4, building, 5 chord ready for 1. And I think, again, my theory is he doesn't want it to be too much like the peak, because the peak of the piece is going to happen on the next page. So what he does is he just continues on the G chord. Then he goes to this chord. Now, I'm going to play the next chord for you. You could analyze this as an A7 chord. Okay. Which goes to an F sharp fully diminished 7th chord, which then goes to a G chord, another 5 chord, which goes to our 1. However, this is one of those things I had to look at these pieces very practically. If you're a piano player trying to play this, there's sometimes the chords are super helpful. 90% or 95% of the chords in this piece are super helpful. However, at this moment, this is best understood as just chromaticism. And you can even hear my left hand just doing this. Move it up, move it up, move it up, move it up, move it up. That's all the left hand's doing. So is that really a functional A7 chord that's supposed to go a D minor and then tricks us? I don't think so. I think this is just Chopin doing a chromatic line. Again, he's sort of sabotaging. Instead of doing this, which is stronger, he turns it into like a scale, which actually makes it a little less powerful. Again, this was the biggest peak of the whole piece. He probably would go and be super strong. Instead, he goes, and again, sort of keeps this from being probably, it's huge, it's dramatic, it's epic, but probably keeps it from being as loud as it could be, and it will be on the next page. All right, before I return to the beginning, I'm going to get a drink of coffee here. If anyone watching this works for a coffee company and wants to like sponsor me and give me money and coffee, hook me up. Okay, now we're going to get a few freebie measures back to the key. And here's our 1 chord, same 2 chord, same 4 chord, same 1 chord, same 2 chord, same vague. Is it a B fully diminished 7th chord, or is it a 4 minor 7 chord? Either way, back to this where we do our walk down, G, chromatic, F, chromatic, page turn. And now things are going to start to get different. Before we did this, that's how Chopin got to the next section. Now, funny enough, a little spoiler for you. He's going to end up in the same place. He's trying to get to the same C, super big arpeggio. He's trying to actually get to that same destination, but he's going to get there by a longer route to make the build up even bigger. So this time he does the 1 chord, he does a 2 chord, but instead of doing the 4 chord to the major 1 chord, he does directly to this chord. So what's this? We got C, G, E, and B flat. Put on 1 octave. We have C major, both at B flat. I actually referenced this chord earlier, like C major will be a major 1 chord, but with that B flat, it becomes a 5 chord. You have to ask yourself, what is C the 5 of? C is the 5 chord in what key? F minor. So this C chord, the C7 chord, is going to take us to the key of F minor. However, Chopin actually goes to D flat major. This is actually, we've been kind of messing around with the key of D flat earlier. It was our Neapolitan, right? He uses this chord, C7, instead of going to, it goes to, and we call this a deceptive move or a deceptive cadence, where you think you're going to go 5 to 1 and you go 5 to 6. You go up a half step or a whole step and go to the key of 6 instead. But this is just Chopin's way of getting us back to that Neapolitan chord. So we're like Neapolitan. And we actually do this for 2 measures, just D flat major. And then we get a really interesting chord. This is one of the more, it's surprisingly rare chord, and I'll tell you why. So if you look at this chord, it's just a fully diminished 7th chord. You can recognize fully diminished 7th chords because they're symmetrical. You can recognize them by having stacks of minor thirds. You can recognize them by every 3 half step. But depending on the piece, I mean, every composer, Chopin, Bach, Mozart, Schumann, Schubert, everyone uses tons of fully diminished 7th chords. They're all over the place. And they almost always go and resolve up by half steps. So we have this one here. Play this one here, which is spelled as an E fully diminished 7th chord, which should go to F minor, but it goes to this chord. So there's actually a certain type of fully diminished 7th chord that does not resolve up by half step. I'm going to tell you the name first because the name actually kind of describes what it is. It's called a common tone fully diminished 7th chord. So one of the features of a fully diminished 7th chord is that all the notes move. You have this dissonance and they all resolve. Dissonance, all resolve. Dissonant, all resolve. Okay? But a common tone, literally what it sounds like is you're going to play a chord, you're going to keep a note the same. You're going to keep the note the same. And by just keeping one note the same, not moving, it completely changes the nature of that chord, right? That chord no longer feels like or like dramatic driving chords. It feels, oopsie, not that one. There's a level of, I want to almost say sweetness to it despite being such a harsh chord. So this is what he does here. It's a D flat major, C, T, common tone, fully diminished 7th chord. He's going to go back to D flat major. However, he does add this B in there, which is interesting. It kind of makes it like a D flat 7 chord. But the reason that's there is because we're going to a G chord. And you're probably like, whoa, G chord. Okay, we're just the key of D flat. We went to the key of D flat to go to a G chord. But remember, the key of D flat was our Neapolitan. Our Neapolitan in the key of C was D flat. Our 5 chord is G. Now, the good news is we only have about 20 measures left. You've actually dealt with some of these measures before, so you are almost there. We have now arrived on our final big, giant, massive push to get back to the dramatic C major arpeggio. So we just got from our Neapolitan to our 5 chord right here. Now, we could, again, we could just skip to right there, but Chopin's all about prolonging the drama. So we got our G chord. We have another one of these fully diminished 7th chord, B, fully diminished 7th chord, B, D, F, A flat, which should go to C minor or C major. And it does actually. So we actually resolved our G chord. It took an extra chord to get there, but this is a big moment. We finally actually went like we're kind of expecting to. D flat, Neapolitan, G, B fully diminished 7th chords also wants to go to C minor, C minor. Okay, the next measures is one of my favorite measures of the entire piece. Actually, not so much because of what happens harmonically, but because of what happens melodically. So if you kind of take a step back, we've been talking a lot about chords, but there actually has been a melody this whole time. There's accents on the first note, and the top note is arpeggio. So we kind of have this melody that's been going. I'm going to play it up an octave so you can hear it a little better. But the melody's been going. And the second time it's. Then. Something along those lines, right? The melody has been churning and churning and churning and churning and churning. And then right here, if we focus on for just a second, what the melody does here from this D flat chord we have, again, play it up an octave. Maybe I won't. Let's play here in octaves though. Melody goes. Again, one of the best moments of the entire piece is Chopin does this. Get to our G chord. And then A flat. Now check this out. It may not seem like much because it's just a C, but it's actually a super high note for our melody. Now I know our melody is doing these arpeggios back and forth, but if you just retract the melody, which keeps doing things like, and then when this part here does this, it's actually a super high note. Like imagine this entire time a tenor or maybe like a cello was playing this tune kind of in this deep register, and they kind of sort of get to shoot out of their shell and go play middle C, which would be like higher on the range for this melody here. So all that's happening harmonically here is Chopin just goes directly from C minor, direct shift to C major, which is really cool because we get that melody that goes G, and then jumps up to C. And then here we have, actually things start to get normal for just a second here. This is like a wild chord, but it's not. It's just F suspended. It's like a pop term, right? F suspended. Everybody, oh, you suspended. That's a pop term in our classical music. Yeah, just a suspended chord. It's going to resolve right here. So F minor, but the A flat is suspended up to B flat. It falls to this. And then we get a couple important chords here. Here's another F minor chord. This chord is our 2 from like the very beginning of the piece, our 2 half diminished 7. Actually, I remember really early on in the piece, I said the 2 going to the 4 was weird from like a progression point of view. Typically you go from 4 to 2 to 5, not the other way around. This is actually the fixed version of that. We have 4, 4, 4, 2, because 2 is a more intense chord, especially the 2-7. And I also like this part because the melody speeds up. I talked a little about melody, how we had this melody going the whole time. Then most of the time we get one chord, one melodic note per measure. We've been typically doing this. So you're tracking the by measure about this fast. And then it was faster, but then really fast here. So there's a lot of notes in a row. And then here is what we've been waiting for. So a lot of this piece, we've had what I call a pedal tone in the lowest note. Like we get stuck on a note. Like we've been stuck on C for a while. Actually, like the whole first page, we were stuck on C. Then we were stuck on A flat for a while. We keep getting stuck on these notes. What we want to happen in this piece is we want to get stuck on 5 and just, which we've been stuck on G for like short little spurts. But we want to get to G. We want to plant on G and not move until we get all these cool chords. Eventually get to a 5-7 chord and then back to the beginning. So let's see how Chopin does this. So we get our cool F, F minor, 2. Now we're ready for a 5 chord, 1 chord, which there is the whole deal of it being like a 1-6-4 chord, which we talked about in our other videos. I'm going to focus on that less just because the main focus of this is the pedal tone becomes G. It's all G for the next 4 measures. Like we're going to get different chords on top, but this is all about now G being stuck in bass. Again, C was stuck in bass, A flat was stuck, but now G is stuck. We're going to have the C minor chord. Then we're going to go to this chord, which is kind of like another A flat major 7, A flat, C, E flat, G, but G stuck in the bottom. And then this chord, which I actually saw before earlier, which is a G7 chord with an A flat on top that has to resolve probably down. And then a real G7 chord. And this is everything we want in a G7 chord. It's all the notes are there. We have a G, B, D, F, no extra notes. And then on top of that, on the way back down, Chopin even gives us, he actually changes the pattern slightly so that we get to the G before resolving it, which if you've been listening to my other videos, you know, often composers want somewhere near the end of the piece, what we call like the true last resolution. I'm not going to say whether that's this at this point. We might see another one later that we might be a candidate, but for right now, this is the best we have. We have a G chord with G on the bottom going to a C with C on the bottom. That's extremely strong and literally what we've been waiting for. Like I told you earlier, we were this close and Chopin sabotaged it. Remember we did this and he could have done it, but then he jumped and went this weird chromatic walk up because he literally sabotaged the resolution because he didn't want that to be as important as this. And then this ends up being really important because here we get 4 measures of G, this, this, and back to our big giant C chord. This is actually for a while here the same as the first time we do it. It was C chord and then G chord, C chord. Same thing as before, just call those all G chords. This is all big G chord with C on the bottom. F, F. Now here's where things get kind of interesting. It's the same chord as earlier. Earlier we did those F major chords, then went to F minor, and we actually have, if you remember, we had what I called a plagal cadence. We had a 4-1 cadence. Now, sometimes composers will do that, but then at the end of the piece, they'll fix it and they'll do a 4 to 5 to 1. However, Chopin like doubles down right here in this moment. He does 4, 4. Now check this out. It's our minor 4, but he does the bigger version of the arpeggio where it lasts for the entire 2 measures. And he's like, no, let's do 2 more measures of that. He does another 2 measures of 4, and then he just goes to C major. So it is that same 4-1. This ends with a 4-1 cadence. So the piece actually kind of ends on a plagal cadence. We kind of mentioned that way back at the beginning. What do you call that chord right here? It's just like a weird 5 chord. It's a weird 4 chord. I'm almost inclined to call it a weird 4 chord because it kind of feels like the plagal cadence is one of the pieces tend to have like hallmarks, tend to have returning ideas. And this one definitely has the 4 chord idea. So you play your last chorus. You hold on to it. You keep pulling on to it. And the end here is just all C. You change the bass between C and G, but it's all C chord, all C chord, all C chord, all C chord, all C chord. So it actually ends in major 1. Pieces can do this. They can start in minor 1, like C minor. They still need to end in C, but Chopin chooses to end this one in not C minor, but he ends it in C major. Before we go, I just want to ask you, take a second and share this video with a few people. These videos take 3 or 4 or 5 times longer than my average video to put out because there's so much work in the editing, so it'll be super helpful if you take a second, share it with a few people so it reaches even more eyes and ears. And then if you're really into this chord analysis type of video, be sure to check out my Patreon page. I have more of them over there. Also, just a great way to support the growth of the channel, where we're going in general. So check that out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and learned so much about chord analysis. I love harmony. I'm deeply in love with harmony in music and trying to help it inform our playing, our interpretation, and our ability to memorize pieces. So thanks for watching. Hope you learned a lot. See you guys next one.